Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Shakespeare Hour Live. It's great to see you again. I'm Simon Godwin, Artistic Director of the Shakespeare Theatre Company in Washington, D.C. And yes, after a month-long hiatus, our weekly dates with the Bard are back, and so are all of you, and I can't wait to get started on what is, I think, rapidly becoming Shakespeare Theatre Company's longest-running show. The Shakespeare Hour. So we have some great guests tonight, but let me first start with some thank yous. Tonight's episode has been generously sponsored by Ken and Sheila Berman. Ken and Sheila, thank you. I'd also like to thank tonight's sponsors, the Mather, a forward-thinking life plan community being developed in Tysons for those 62 and better, and projected to open in 2023. The Shakespeare Hour is a component of our larger artistic initiative, Shakespeare Everywhere, which is sponsored and supported by the extraordinary Beach Street Foundation. Thank you to them. And yes, it wouldn't be Shakespeare Hour Live if I wasn't broadcasting from Rectortown Methodist Church Hall here in Rectortown, Virginia. Thank you for the church leadership and all the amazing congregation for letting me broadcast from their wonderful space. Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce our guests this evening. Let me start with Tony and Emmy Award nominee Kate Burton, whose credits range from Broadway to hit TV series like Grey's Anatomy and Scandal. Hello, Kate.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Where are you this evening?
I am in Los Angeles, California.
Okay, very good. And,
yes.
How is Los Angeles right now?
It's fine. I'm looking out the window. It's a lovely afternoon. I was just chatting with our other panelists, and it looks terrifying on the news. And this often happens in LA, is that wherever we are, we're okay for a few miles away. So hopefully all okay.
Okay, good. And Kate, I'm still learning about your country, America, is so big as to have different time zones, even within the same country.
Correct.
So you're a bit behind us in time.
It is 4:34 where I am.
Okay. And Kate, let me put you on the spot if I may, because tonight we're talking about Elenis, a play that you yourself have appeared in.
Yes.
And we're talking about the law, but I want to talk a little bit about leadership. If I was going to ask you what makes a great leader, what would you say?
Well, 3 words always come to mind: deliberate, fair, open-minded. And I think leadership one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about lately is leadership needs to lead all the citizens, not just the people who elected or voted for her or for him. And I'll leave it there.
Very good, Kate. Thank you. A good trailer for some of our discussion to come, I think. Wonderful. And I say thank you so much for joining us on the show.
You're welcome.
Let me turn now to Jessie Liu, partner at Skadden. Partner at Skadden Arps, I want to get the name correct, and former United States Attorney for the District of Columbia. Jessie, hello, good evening. Oh, hello, Jessie. I wonder whether, I think you might be muted, Jessie. Let's see. Yeah, are you back with us? Oh. I think it wouldn't be the Shakespeare Hour Live without a little bit of a technical hitch to get us started.
I think I'm unmuted. I've succeeded.
That is terrific, Jessie. Not only have you succeeded in unmuting, but you've also succeeded in bringing the entire Globe Theatre with you this evening. What a great background.
Well, sadly, I am not in London. I'm sitting at home in Arlington, Virginia, with a fake background. I'm having a lot of fun with these.
Well, as somebody who's directed a play at the Globe in London, it's very nostalgic for me to see that beautiful building behind you. Jessie, I might ask you the same question, if I may. What are you thinking around leadership right now? What makes a great leader in your view?
Well, I think one very, very important thing, to piggyback a little bit on what Kate just talked about, is that a good leader, a strong leader, needs to care about the people that she or he is leading, and not just say that she or he cares about them, but really care about them and care about all of them. And to me, that's the #1 requirement.
Yeah, yes, that's interesting as we dwell on Elenis, because I think one of the things perhaps we'll talk about is, although he's a mighty warrior, he's not always the most compassionate leader of men and women. And so the role of kindness and compassion within leadership, as you point out, I think is very interesting. Thank you and welcome, and see you shortly.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Great to see you. And finally, I'd like to introduce our guest tonight, Abbe David Lowell, partner at Winston Strawn, vice chair of the Shakespeare Theatre Company Board of Trustees, which means he's kind of my boss under Mike Klein, the chair, and of course chair of the Shakespeare Theatre Company's Bard Association. Abbe, good evening. How are you?
Great time. Good to see everybody.
Where are you this evening, Abbe?
Rain-soaked downtown Washington, D.C. Nothing as exotic as L.A. or as creative as Jessie's ability to thrust herself in.
Okay, great. Well, nice to hear you, Abbe. Can I ask you about leadership? I mean, some of the things, do you agree with what's been spoken already?
I think that's hard to disagree with that. So I would say it's slightly different, just to kind of set it into the play of Coriolanus, for example. I think two things. I think being incredibly in tune and empathetic with the people that you are leading. I think second, because we're talking about Shakespeare, who cares so much about words and names, one of the sub-themes of Coriolanus, if you go through the play, is the talk about what's the significance of a name. So I think a leader understands that words matter and understands that leadership sometimes requires you to speak and also sometimes requires you not to speak.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you so much, Abbe. What is the power of silence as well as of language? A very theatrical question. Well, I haven't seen him for a while, but I'm very glad that my colleague and co-host, Drew Lichtenberg, STC's resident dramaturg and literary manager, is my co-host this evening. Drew, have you missed the Shakespeare Hour?
Oh, I really missed seeing you, Simon, more than anything else. So my night, my week, my month is all made.
Well, that's extremely kind of you, Drew. I'm not sure if I quite believe you, but I'm very flattered nonetheless.
Oh, I am completely ingenuous as always.
Okay, perfect.
Sorry, you go ahead.
No, please, Drew, over to you.
I just want to greet everyone tuning in, saying it's very good to be back with you all, and also acknowledge that you're accessing us not through Zoom as usual, but through Vimeo. I think I'm pronouncing that right, but have no fear. You will see on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a Q&A button to ask us questions. There's a chat button to offer your own thoughts and opinions on the various things that we may be saying. So please start asking questions, and we will hope to get to all of them in this program. And if we don't, do not fear, we will answer them at length in our traditional Shakespeare Hour Friday newsletter, which we will be writing again now that we are back. So yeah, our theme tonight is Shakespeare in the Law. We have gathered with us two of the members of the Shakespeare Bard Association, I believe, esteemed members of the litigant community, as well as Kate. And the play we chose to talk about is Coriolanus. Now, when we told Jessie and Abbe and Kate that we were going to talk about this play, they said, why Coriolanus? Coriolanus is a political play, isn't it? Not a legal play. But we had a feeling that there was a lot in the play about the rule of law, about the formation of the law, the malleability of the law, and the connection between law and politics, hopefully, which we will delve into tonight. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Coriolanus, it is one of the more infrequently staged plays by Shakespeare that has an argument to be considered a masterpiece, as I do indeed consider it. It is his last tragedy, his last Roman play. It premiered in 1608 at the Blackfriars Theatre, which was their new private indoor theatre that the King's Men leased. So it's a Jacobean play written during the late part of Shakespeare's career. And unlike Julius Caesar and Antony and Cleopatra, it is not set during the Roman Empire. It is set in the very, very early days of the Roman Republic, so 500 BC instead of in the Common Era. The days when Rome itself is starting to be born as a political entity. And the conflict in the play, like the other Roman plays, it deals with these big abstract questions of the state, of politics, of the law, but the conflict is more specifically about class. Coriolanus is a patrician, an aristocratic general, a war hero. He starts the play as Caius Marcius, and then as Abbe was saying, he is renamed Coriolanus for his exploits in war. And he is opposed to the plebeian class gaining representation in the Roman assembly through this new political vehicle known as the tribunes, the people's voices. And eventually, indeed, Coriolanus is banished from Rome. He joins with Rome's archenemies and is about to invade Rome, destroy the city, destroy this civilization before it can become the world-conquering empire, but instead he chooses to sacrifice himself so that the Roman state may exist. So it's one of Shakespeare's most political plays, but also a play about how law can be shaped by people, by political actors. Yeah, so that's a kind of brief overview of this very complicated, somewhat obscure play. And the question that we put to our guests tonight was, what do you think Coriolanus says about Shakespeare's view or understanding of the law? Or maybe what does it say about the law for us sitting here in America today in 2020? I wonder, Jessie, maybe we could start with you.
And it seems that I have learned how to unmute myself. So I'm very, very proud. That's success for tonight. So as Drew was saying, when I heard that our conversation tonight would focus on Coriolanus, I was a bit surprised because I've always thought of that play as being about politics much more than it was about law. But on rereading it, I realized that it has a lot to say about the relationship between law and politics, and more specifically about the role of the rule of law in a highly political world. And even raises the question, I think, of whether there really is such a thing as the rule of law when the world is inherently and sometimes overwhelmingly political. And I think that makes it particularly relevant today, and happy to discuss that in a little bit more detail later in the hour, because we were talking about that before we got started. And so my reading of the play shows that from the very first scene, when the citizens declare Caius Marcius, later Coriolanus, the quote, chief enemy to the people, it's clear that even though they're using legal language, what's really happening is purely political. Later in the play, it seems that there's a process for appointing consuls, which really is sort of like our nomination and confirmation process a little bit, except that in this case, this is the Senate nominates and the tribunes or the people confirm. But this process in Republican Rome, like our own confirmation process, is inherently political. So his patrician friends urge Coriolanus to speak to the people, to go out there, put on the gown of humility, show them his battle wounds. Coriolanus resists because he's not a political person. Despite this, the people decide to approve him as consul, but the tribunes, who are extremely skilled and wily politicians, undermine that process by convincing the people to revoke their approval and untruthfully to blame the tribunes themselves for their original sign-off on Coriolanus's appointment as consul. Chaos breaks out. Coriolanus rails against the common people. The tribunes immediately accuse him of treason. And then the tribunes say that he has rejected the rule of law and is therefore no longer subject to its protections, and they call for his execution. Menenius steps in, trying to restore the rule of law. He says, let me go and bring him back. He shall answer by a lawful form in peace to his utmost peril. And the tribunes agree, but as soon as Menenius leaves, they say, Sicinius says, assemble the people hither. When they hear me say it shall be so, be it either for death, for fine, or banishment, then let them, if I say fine, cry fine, if death, cry death, insisting on the old prerogative and power and the truth of the cause. So to me, this process and the language that Shakespeare uses shows a world in which politics and sometimes flat out mob rule is wrapped in the language of law and in the trappings of the rule of law. But it really raises a question about whether the rule of law is actually what's happening here.
Yeah, and you have in the play, as we do today, you have, you mentioned Menenius, who is a senator. He's in the aristocratic body, and you have the tribunes who are in the House, sort of the forum representing the people, and they're both using these legal language and legal institutions for their own political goals. Kate, you have acted in Coriolanus, you have taught Coriolanus. Is what Jessie says about the play resonating with you, and how do you react to this reading?
I really appreciated what you said, Jessie, and I only wish I could have spent time with you at the beginning of our rehearsal process last summer. I mean, it really is. I'm going to speak to you more as an actor now, an actor who has played Volumnia, Coriolanus's mother, very powerful mother, very, very tyrannical mother, and has groomed him as a warrior. And what's so very interesting for me in the experience of being in the play is the notion that you create what you think is this sort of perfect Uberman in Coriolanus. And in fact, he is brilliant at fighting. He is brilliant at battle. He is brilliant at winning the wars. But when it comes to being a leader, a politician, he is not very brilliant at that. He's not good with people. He doesn't know how to charm them. So in light of what we were talking about with leadership, it was such an interesting experience playing his mother and trying to teach him how to be better with people. But the biggest thing that really spoke home to me, and our wonderful, wonderful director, Daniel Sullivan, spoke so much about the class divide that you mentioned, Drew. The class divide between the patricians and the plebeians rather. And that really played, we really worked so hard to find what made our lives different. How were the patricians, Volumnia, Coriolanus, Menenius, Cominius, and how were our lives different than the life of your basic plebeian? And what was the divide between them? And it felt oftentimes kind of like the Russian Revolution, that there was such a divide that was so palpable, and that the two tribunes, Brutus and Sicinius, are sort of members of the house, as 'twere, became the voice of the people, but then they started to inform the way the people behaved, and then they started to incite the behavior of the people. And so as a kind of overarching Mother Earth character that I played in the play, very mean Mother Earth, that I was watching this transition of my son being a hero to my son being, basically a villain. And so the notion of him going to the other side, going to Tellus Ophidius, going to the Volscians, what we spent a lot of time discussing what the different worlds were of the Volscians world and the Romans world, and what it meant to be banished. I mean, so it played with obviously incredible amount of, who creates the laws and who determines what the laws are and who enforces the laws. And it felt as if in being in the play as an actor that Coriolanus made every wrong move. He couldn't make a right move. And yet he was a fascinating character to watch his transformation from this warrior boy to this devastated man by the end of the play.
And you were saying, Kate, before we started taping, that your father actually played Coriolanus at the Old Vic. So for you, playing Volumnia, his mother. Yes,
and my father, Richard Burton, played Coriolanus at the Old Vic before I was born. And what was extraordinary was, as I was working on the play at the beginning, we have different versions. It's always the same play, but we have the different versions. And one version we always have is the Arden, and always have the Folger, and all various other ones. And in the Arden are extensive notes about different performances of note. And so I would constantly I would be looking at a scene, and then I'd look down at the note and it would say, in this moment, Richard Burton took a long pause before he said his line, and I mean, it was a cosmic experience for me, reading that and then playing the mother. So amazing experience.
Yeah, I'm sure. I can only imagine.
Yeah,
so both of you have mentioned this class divide, this kind of power vacuum that is the status quo of the play at the beginning. And Simon and Abbe, before we went on, we were talking about, the fact that Shakespeare's play resonates so strongly with what's been happening in recent American history. A little bit of context, Plutarch writes about riots in 500 BC over a shortage of corn. In Shakespeare's time, in 1607, there was something called the Midlands Uprising, where the people of Stratford, Shakespeare's hometown, had a violent protest movement over a shortage of food. And this was also one of the periods when theaters were closed due to the plague. So there was disease, there were food shortages, there was starvation, and there were people getting rich off of these inequalities. And I think one of the really interesting things the play raises is when the people are being violent, right, in peacetime, when they're resorting to violence or wartime tactics during peacetime, what is the appropriate government response? And, Abbe, I'm not sure if you, with your expertise as a lawyer, care to weigh in on some of the recent parallels.
Let me try, because I want to build on what everybody else has said. When you ask the concept of what does Coriolanus particularly say about Shakespeare and the law, this is what I think. I think Shakespeare thinks that there's some basic bedrock idea of order and justice, but that it is too easily, and through him very criticizably, overcome or negated by the whims of both monarchs, leaders, as well as those who are governed. Look at the trajectory of this play, and Jessie made some mention of it already. The very first lines, when we're about Caius Marcius, is that the citizens already proclaim not only for him to be an enemy, but to put him to death. And they say, and it's interesting, they say, this is a verdict. But it was a verdict with no trial, no due process, no presentation, just a conclusion. And then what's interesting about the play in terms of Shakespeare's view of the law, that's a seesaw between the people saying that's their view of the law, and in this play, the people that are governed, the commoners, also say the same. And then the aristocrats say the same. So as he battles for the people and prevails, he's deemed good enough to run for office and be their president or a consul, but then only remarkably to be scorned and banished thereafter. And almost Drew and others, the marker of this play, if you read it again, look at each almost act, there's some proclamation that he should be put to death. And in each and every time it is said, it is without what we would call process at all. And it is that power struggle. So I think Shakespeare believes that there's a bedrock sense of law and justice, but I think he's presenting in all these plays that it can be muted, it can be bent by forces other than the law. For example, we all know the much misinterpreted line from Henry IV, where Jack the Butcher says, the first thing we do is kill all the lawyers. People don't understand that that's Shakespeare saying what you do to prevent the mob rule, that it is the law and lawyers that create some structure to society. So in the struggle between the aristocrats and the plebeians, let me say that what I found also interesting is back into US, the struggle that, if you will, between, let's say, Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton, as to whether government should be centralized and trust the people, or whether it should only be the aristocrats. Notice that Coriolanus, like Hamilton, who we love and sing about and now dance about, believed also that only the aristocrats could hold the power because they knew better. But then we have that tension with the commoners taking the reins and overcoming the aristocrats as well.
And I think one of the fascinating questions that I always ask myself, and I'm sure a lot of people who watch Shakespeare's plays ask, is how did Shakespeare know so much about the ancient Roman Republic? I mean, we know he read Plutarch, but it seems like he is a very sophisticated thinker about the law and someone with a fairly intricate knowledge of not just legal rhetoric, but also legal theories of governance. As you say, Abbe, he has a bedrock notion of what justice and law is, even though in a play like Coriolanus, he may have a very pessimistic interpretation of whether human beings are capable of following that bedrock. So I wonder if any of you have theories about how, I have my own theories, but I wonder if any of you have theories about Shakespeare's knowledge of the law and how he came to access that knowledge.
Well, Drew, let me just jump in briefly on that because it's something that we've talked about. So much about him is a mystery to all of us, of course, but here's something that people should remember when we talk about Shakespeare and the law. First of all, we always wonder what his formal education is, and no view of it included any particular legal training. There's a period of time, Drew, that you well know that are called Shakespeare's lost years. It was between when he was 21 years old and 30, between 1584 and 1595, and nobody knows what he was doing. And some posit that he served as a law clerk in that period of time. The problem with that is that even as law clerks, there would be some written documentation of his making filings and no one has found it. On the other hand, no one really knows. But he has such an intricate knowledge of the law, it has to come from somewhere. By the way, some have said that that whole legal analysis of why he knows the law is support for the proposition that Shakespeare wasn't the author of these plays. It had to be somebody else. But we've learned he knows so much about so many things, that's not a very good argument. So I think where he learns is that, remember the time we're living in. The law itself was like reality TV then. People actually went to court and have something to do and watch, and it was very well known. Shakespeare's own family, by the way, was extraordinarily litigious. His father, as I remember reading, basically was in court 60 times, suing and being sued. And so I don't think this was as foreign as we might think it was. And the last point about his familiarity with the law, you already said that he played to the Inns of Court at Blackfriars. In all the Jacobean plays, that's mostly playing to the level of sophisticated, educated people. Here's something interesting. Nearly 2/3 of all of Shakespeare's plays, over 20, have something that is either a trial scene or analogous to a trial scene. So the fact that we lawyers love Shakespeare is not surprising. One other tidbit, as of the year 2000, somebody did a survey, there were over 1,000 state and federal court opinions that quote Shakespeare.
We actually have another theory from one of our viewers asking a question. Lynn asks, do you think that lawyers love Shakespeare because he shows the underbelly of the law, which lawyers can't really talk about publicly? I wonder, Jessie, if you have a response to that.
Well, I think there's a lot about Shakespeare's portrayal of the law and legal proceedings, which is like a 16th or early 17th century legal drama, really. When I first decided that I wanted to be a lawyer in the 80s as a child watching LA Law, which I think was so much fun. And I think there's an element of that in Shakespeare's plays where I think he makes legal proceedings very entertaining. So I think there's that. But I think he really also raises some very interesting questions about the value of law, as we were talking about before. And lawyers are trained in law school and throughout their careers to venerate the law in many ways. We talk about the quote unquote rule of law almost as though it were a religion. And Shakespeare questions a lot of that. And I think that questioning is also an inherent part of being a lawyer. And I think that's one of the things that makes Shakespeare's portrayal of the law so interesting to lawyers.
And we do know that at least 2 plays, The Comedy of Errors and Twelfth Night, as Abbe was saying, were performed at the Inns of Court in London, which were these 4 basically law schools or fraternities that were very close to where the Blackfriars Theater was. And we also know that many other plays premiered. In fact, the first English blank verse drama was played at the Inns of Court. So there's a kind of special intimate relationship between these law schools where a lot of the second sons of these wealthy families would go, and then people like George Chapman or Thomas Middleton, who were law students, would drop out and be seduced into a life in the arts writing plays. And Shakespeare knew all these people. He collaborated with Thomas Middleton on Timon of Athens. So there is actually a lot of personal overlap between Shakespeare and the legal world of Jacobean London. And people surmise that plays like Troilus and Cressida, plays like Coriolanus may have been written especially for lawyers and filled with these kinds of abstract legal arguments. I just want to make a quick announcement. It is not a Q&A button. It is an ask button on the right side of your screen. We're getting very few questions or fewer questions than we usually get. I assume it's not because of our dry topic. I think our topic is quite engaging and I'll laugh riot tonight. Simon, we are at the halfway point of the show, and I'm wondering if you have any announcements about coming episodes that you'd like to share with our viewers.
Well, yes, thank you, Drew. As the kind of clerk of the court, which I, in some ways I am tonight, I want to say that next week, the Academy Award winner, Dame Helen Mirren, will be joining us to talk to the director, Julie Taymor, who has directed a number of Shakespeare's on film, including The Tempest, in which Helen Mirren played Prospero, will be on the show talking to Dr. Peter Holland as well, who is an expert in Shakespeare and film and who taught me at Cambridge. So Peter, Julie, and Helen are on our show next week. And looking ahead, we will have 4 new episodes to share for the month of October, and we're going to be hoping to announce those episodes to you all next week. Back to you, Drew.
Wow, well, we have one of the great dames of American theater, Kate Burton, and next week we have Dame Helen Mirren. So we're truly an embarrassment of riches this September. Another question from Terry that I think might be a good one for Kate. Don't you think part of the key to understanding Shakespeare is that he believes in character and competence, not in abstract systems? In other words, if I can paraphrase for Terry, isn't he more of a psychological thinker than a legal thinker in some ways?
Oh, yes. I mean, you know, listen, what amazes me always, and I'm always so thrilled to listen to folks who are not theater, you know, who are not people who make theater, talk about Shakespeare. And I've been absolutely mesmerized by what Jessie and Abbe have said. Yes, I mean, I have had the experience. I've been in many, many Shakespeare plays, much to my great delight. And what I really do find is that you are, you know, it's just like any of the great characters in theatrical literature. In a way, even when you're playing what is a villainous character, say like Richard III, for instance, you know, he gives you the ability to not have to judge the character as you're working on the characters, you're playing these characters. And so that you can understand certain things about this man who does these terrible things and kills so many people. And you understand why it is that he does the things he does. So I don't think Shakespeare judges his characters, which is what makes it so exciting to play, especially when you're playing some of the anti-heroes like Coriolanus. And I know in my family, between my dad and myself, I think that we always were very drawn to playing these kind of anti-hero characters, anti-heroine characters. And in my case, having also played Prospero, you know, that's a very anti-hero character. And so that's what I love about Shakespeare, is that he allows the audience to decide how they feel about the character. And what he presents for you is this multi-leveled, multi-dimensional human beings that are truly human beings, even with all the verse and the iambic pentameter and the bouncing back to prose. He allows you to make up your own mind, and it's often a very thrilling experience for the audience.
We have a comment from our viewer Nelson for Jessie. He says, Jessie Lou, please run for something. I'll vote for you. So impressive oratory, clearly. We also have an interesting question from Surf City Bard. Is it possible that Shakespeare's interest in trials and courts is due to his being a hidden Catholic beholden to the Holy Roman Curia? I don't know if we have any takers for that one, but obviously Shakespeare's religion is a topic of great debate and controversy and scholarly interest to this day. I am eager to hear some passages of Shakespeare, which we always try to get to in the second half of the show. We ask our guest panelists to prepare a passage of about 10 lines or so. And I'm wondering, Kate, since you are our guest actress, if you have a passage prepared. Although I'm eager also to hear from Jessie and Abbe.
Yes, I do. I was looking through the whole play, and I was just trying to find something, sort of a moment where you could hear sort of the argument being, propelled. And this is in Act 3, Scene 3. It's in what is probably the trial scene. And Coriolanus says to Sicinius, who's the tribune, one of the two tribunes are Sicinius and Brutus, "What is the matter that being passed for consul with full voice, I am so dishonored that the very hour you take it off again?" And Sicinius says, "Answer to us." Coriolanus says, "Say then, 'tis true, I ought so." And Sicinius says, "We charge you that you have contrived to take from Rome all seasoned office, and to wind yourself into a power tyrannical, for which you are a traitor to the people." Coriolanus says, "How? Traitor?" And then things go haywire from that point on. He just basically can't control himself. He starts to shout at everybody, and he ends up basically saying, the Shakespearean equivalent of "put it where the sun don't shine."
I think one of the really interesting things that we've circled around so far in this conversation is the lack of character, interestingly, that Coriolanus has. That he's this figure who's been molded by his mother. He's had his name changed, as you said at the top of the show, Abbe. And he is not somebody who is able to, he sort of lays it out very clearly in that speech right there, but he's not somebody who has a kind of humanity that he can fall back on in order to make his case as consul. It's really, his public image is assaulted, and that's when he loses it. I think in some ways Shakespeare is writing about the failure of this society to allow Coriolanus to be a human being. Jessie, Abbe, I'm curious what passages you guys have prepared.
I'll let Jessie go, because she and I were trying to figure out which, and we never did it. So I'll let her go. I have two in case she picks the one I do.
So I also have two in case Abbe picked the one that I was going to go with. I am actually going to go back, and Abby's actually already touched on this a bit, to the very, very first 10 or 11 lines of the play, where the first citizen says, "Before we proceed any further, hear me speak." And already in the third word of the play, there is an echo of legal language, an echo of proceeding, the hear ye at the beginning of a legal proceeding, the idea of a hearing. All speak, speak. The first citizen says, "You are all resolved rather to die than to famish." And the people answer, "Resolved, resolved." First citizen says, "First you know Caius Marcius is chief enemy to the people." And that struck me because it has an echo of a very common caption in criminal cases: people versus the name of the defendant. And in federal cases, it would be United States versus the name of the defendant. But it's almost as though the first citizen is announcing an indictment against Caius Marcius, who sadly does not have Abbe to defend him, or I think he would have gotten off. The people respond, "We know it, we know it." First citizen says, "Let us kill him and we'll have corn at our own price. Is it a verdict?" And as Abbe pointed out earlier, this is a verdict with, at best, an indictment, but no trial and no deliberation. And in fact, the citizens reject any fact-finding, any due process, or even any deliberation. They respond, "No more talking on it. Let it be done. Away, away." So there in the first 10 or 11 lines of the play, I think there is set a tone of, there are the trappings of and kind of the language of law being brought to bear, but what's really happening is not at all, is really extra legal rather than legal.
So
Beautiful exegesis, Jessie.
So let me, since I didn't pick, I did almost pick that one, Jessie, but I'm going to do two ones that merge, two shorter ones, because it dovetails, Drew, about what you were saying. So if you go back to what I said about Shakespeare's view of the law, that there's this bedrock principle, but it can get bent and broken by the struggle of those who are governing using the law and those that are governed by the law, let me turn to what in Act 2, Scene 2, the two officers are talking about where Coriolanus stands at this point. And they say, "Faith, there have been many great men that have flattered the people who never loved them. And there be many that have loved, they know not wherefore. So that if they love, they know not why, they hate upon no better ground. Therefore, for Coriolanus, neither to care whether they love or hate him manifests the true knowledge that he has in their disposition, and only out of noble carelessness lets them plainly see." You know, you were talking about like Shakespeare is presenting Coriolanus as somebody who does not have humanity, as either a leader or somebody who's trying to get either the people to support him or the aristocrats to support him, and the tension of him not wanting people to be the magistrates. What a lovely, dichotomy of what makes him incapable is that line. But really, let me give you the line that I think captures what we're trying to say. In Act 3, Scene 1, this is what Sicinius says. And boy, doesn't it say it all about what we're trying to capture as to Shakespeare and the law. Speaking about what will happen to Coriolanus. "He shall be thrown down the Tarpeian rock with rigorous hands. He hath resisted the law, and therefore the law shall scorn him further trial than severity of the public power, which he so sets as naught." Think about what that two sentences mean. How has Coriolanus, quote, scorned the law? How has he resisted the law? And even if he has, isn't he supposed to get either the benefit of process? But if you scorn the law, you are scorned if you try to apply the law. It's a wonderful concept. And as somebody other than me said earlier, all these plays, whether it be Coriolanus, certainly whether it was the issues of Henry, and there are others, is this tension between the mob and the rule of law. And I think that's a great sentence to show you that here, Shakespeare is, by pointing it out, saying, that's not right. It's not right. If somebody is accused of breaking the law or violating the law, or in this case, scorning the law should scorn them back. It's interesting.
Wow, thank you, Abbe. And what I'm just also thinking about in relation to this question of the law, the rule of law, this expression that's come up through the evening, is the difference. Well, first of all, I wonder whether any of our panelists, because I don't, but I find myself thinking, what is the derivation of the word law? Where does that word come from? And what is the difference between law and justice? Because it seems like there are times when we feel that the law is not on our side and we need to somehow protest like those people do at the beginning. How much is there a difference between law and justice? And finally, I suppose, what I find fascinating in the play is that if the law is something which we follow, which we are governed by, that we obey, the person that fundamentally Coriolanus obeys is his mother. Because, of course, we have this extraordinary scene at the end when he's about to sack Rome. He's going to take his revenge on the city that has rejected him. And his mother comes out and says, essentially, don't do this, and lays down a whole series of reasons why he shouldn't. And in the end, the law that he obeys is the law of blood. It's his mother, and he agrees, and he lays down his arms and says, okay, I'm done. And actually has this phrase, these words that really reminded me of Hamlet. I think he says, let me find it. He says about letting, but let it come, he says, which is the moment when he acknowledges his mum is right and he is wrong. And Hamlet, of course, says, let be at the end of his life, which acknowledges a kind of cosmic law, if you like, which we follow beyond the making of men. It's a kind of metaphysical law. So I guess what I wanted just to draw attention to is how many different kinds of law there are in the play and how many different kinds of law each of us as individuals are governed by. But I don't know whether anyone wants to come in with that, to refute that or add to that in some way.
I'm not sure etymologically where law comes from, and maybe I can be corrected by our advocates here, but we have a comment from viewer Debbie who says she thinks one of the themes of Coriolanus is that there is no rule of law, either in the manipulation of it by the commoners and the patricians alike. It is exactly the lack of the rule of law that leads to turmoil as well as the tremendous failures of character. So she has sort of the opposite interpretation of Abbe, which is that Shakespeare is presenting us with a vision of a lawless cosmos in this play.
Actually, Drew, let me say that I actually like that comment. And if I didn't say it as well as that, I should have. I don't think she and I are disagreeing. I think Shakespeare believes that there is some bedrock principle. But as the commentator said, it is manipulated so that it erases. So my concept is if you had the Constitution, or you had the Bill of Rights, or you had the volumes behind you of the law, but what you did is you threw them out when you didn't want to use them. And I think I agree with that.
There is a profound speech that Aufidius, Coriolanus's rival, says at the end of the play when he's pondering all the events that have happened. And it's sort of about this idea. He says, one fire drives out one fire, one rock drives out one rock. Our virtues lie in the interpretation of the time, which essentially means might makes right. The rule of law is whatever a certain era says the rule of law is, and it can be manipulated from below by the people or from above by the aristocrats. We are all at the mercy of this manipulation of the rule of law.
Let me answer Simon's question if I can. It's really a fascinating one, Simon. Like all of this is fascinating, so picking anything out really is redundant. Having said that, the difference between law and justice reminds me so interestingly. In Judaism, we read portions of the Torah each week, and it progresses from beginning to the end. One that happened just a week ago was from Deuteronomy, where the very famous line that is in there says, "Justice, justice, you shall pursue." It doesn't say law, and it doesn't say anything. It says justice, and it repeats it twice. There's a reason for that because of the word in Hebrew has many meanings. But Simon, I think that is the point. I think Coriolanus points out not so much the rule of law, as the commentator said, but what is the justice of this play? And it keeps bouncing back between what happens to him and not. And as Drew just pointed out, at the end, his mother implores him not to seek revenge, which is not really a great legal phrase, but to do justice by not sacking Rome just because they dissed him. So there is a difference.
Speaking of law, justice, mercy, perhaps, we have a question from another viewer, Eve, asking us to parse the trial scene in The Merchant of Venice really quickly, and what we make of the fact that Portia is able to pass as a judge. And of course, she has that famous speech about the quality of mercy is not strained. How does that fit into this theory that we're developing of Shakespeare's legal philosophy?
Wow. Well, thank you, Drew. That's a good challenge for all of us to recompute The Merchant of Venice. Whilst we're pondering an answer to that, I wonder whether Kate could just speak a little bit about, because it's not dissimilar about natural law, i.e. the law of mother to son and mercy to show mercy to the city. I wonder, Kate, whether you have a memory of making that speech to Coriolanus and what you felt Coriolanus responded to in those arguments, or just emotionally, even if one probably can't remember the actual text, but just how that felt to do that act of persuasion. And then maybe we'll be able to return to Merchant of Venice and work out a through line about tenderness or mercy.
Yeah, that is the interesting thing is you're absolutely right about that. At the end of the day, the only person who has sway over Coriolanus is his mother. And in truth, it comes out of having acted the role of his mother, it comes out of a place of after having been in power, as the family had been, to then have the power taken away from us, to then be treated like, absolutely the lowest of the low, to have come from a powerful place earlier in the play, even though we were quite ragged, the way our production did it, because of course the entire community was ragged, and then to return to Coriolanus as bereft, bedraggled, filthy, and ultimately what Shakespeare has Volumnia do is prostrate herself on the ground in front of Coriolanus to pray him not to destroy Rome. And ultimately, the thing that works with him, at least it did in our interpretation, but I think it is what Shakespeare intended, is when she starts to walk away from him and say, I'm actually rifling through this here just to get the lines right. She pulls out it's an enormous speech. She pulls out all the stops to tell him, to try to convince him, but he doesn't budge. He literally doesn't budge. And then she says, "Come, let us go. This fellow had a vulsion to his mother. His wife is in Coriolis, and his child like him by chance." It's like she just whips out the knife and just digs it in and says, I disown him, basically. Yet give us our dispatch. I am hushed until our city be afire. Let us go. I am hushed until our city be afire, and then I'll speak a little, which was always a line that fascinated me. And she starts to leave, and he takes her, before she's out of his range, he takes her hand. And that Coriolanus taking of Volumnia's hand is sort of one of my own personal experiences as an actor, one of the sort of most seismic moments I've had on stage. And then he says, "Oh, mother, mother, what have you done? Behold, the heavens do ope, the gods look down, and this unnatural scene they laugh at." This unnatural scene, as you had said. What is the natural law? So, the experience of playing that, you play it as you think of it in a very large scope, and you think of the sort of the uber scope of it, and then you think of it as a mother and a son, literally two people.
That's
again,
brilliant.
Human beings.
And Kate, what I'm reminded of, which is in this kind of why Shakespeare is also brilliant, because he's so visual. And so if we can add to the balcony separating those two families, if we can add to the man holding the skull of his beloved jester and contemplating mortality, now we have the garlanded war hero with his mother lying in front of him, begging him to change direction. And they're just incredibly archetypal images, aren't they? Once you've heard them or seen them, you're never going to forget them, because they are profound silhouettes. As well as linguistically very brilliant.
But just reaching out and touching Volumnia's hand, very similar to Leontes reaching out and touching the hand of Hermione at the end of The Winter's Tale.
Exactly.
And I love that line, "Oh, mother, mother, what have you done?" because it's so unpoetic. It's so underwritten. It's so filled with subtext. It's very similar to Leontes saying she's warm, she's alive.
But then we're able to open the very emotional territory of, "Oh, mother, what have you done?" because Coriolanus, of course, will die because of his decision.
And he knows it. I think he knows it. He knows that he will die.
And always Shakespeare gives us the most emotional lines come in the most simple constructions.
Yeah.
When someone who's been really, really complicated speaks from the heart, it's terribly moving. And of course, then I recall too, when you talked about explosions earlier, Kate, that scene when someone says to him, he claims to be the god of Mars. It's an image he's used throughout the show. And then this other guy says, "God of Mars?" And you're just a boy of tears. A crybaby, a mother's boy, and
a mama's boy.
Yeah, can't stand it, and just begs to basically be assassinated, and he's killed shortly afterwards. He just can't bear that concept, and yet it is in some sense who he is, and that's where it's so poignant. The thing that we can't bear to hear is often the most true.
Of course.
We have a brilliant gloss for Simon's question from viewer Neil, who might be our Neil at the Shakespeare Theatre. Old English lagu, from the Old Norse log, meaning something laid down or fixed, of Germanic origin. And actually, Barbara, another viewer, says, "So many of our discussions in the Shakespeare Hour have revolved around the question of how little Shakespeare is interested in what is fixed or laid down. In other words, the law is whatever is fixed or agreed upon as a binding structure in a society, and Shakespeare is a kind of thinker who believes in the opposite of that things are unfixed in his plays. Certainly something to think about there.
I'm extremely happy that I've discovered tonight that the law is a log a fixed thing on the ground. Jessie, I just wanted to make sure that you had time to come in to speak about logs or laws or permeability and fixity or families.
Well, I wanted to go back to that question about the Merchant of Venice, because I think that Shakespeare, throughout his works, often poses tensions between law and other things. So in Coriolanus, a tension between law and politics. I think in some of his other plays, The Merchant of Venice is a very obvious example. I think it's true. This theme runs through Measure for Measure to some extent too. He posits a tension between law and justice and puts them in sort of contravention to each other. And I've always found that interesting in a way that he sort of looks at law and concepts that are related to it, or that people may think really ought to be coextensive with it, and sort of points out where the cracks are, where the distance is between law and other concepts.
And Simon, on the Merchant of Venice, one thing to say as well, the commentator was talking about the quality of mercy. I don't know where he gets this from. I mean, if you could ask, it'd be amazing to figure it out. But think about what he does in Merchant of Venice, which we do every day today when we are being lawyers. That scene where he is judged to live up to the contract of the pound of flesh is the letter of the law. But Shakespeare was putting forward a concept we use every day, which is both what is the spirit of the law and also the division between what we call law, which says you get your pound of flesh, and equity, which says there's another issue above what the written law says. That duality 500-600 years ago continues to be vital in every application of the law today. It's another monumental thing that he was able to present in ways people understand who don't even know those words.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant, and I think that exactly that to be able to take this code, which seemingly human beings need some form of to live by, and then to understand that in itself is a character that can be endlessly refracted, nuanced, and explored, and which has very, very practical resonance for each of us living right now, as we also try and understand the complex relationship between not only law and justice, but this is also think law and order, which could be a discussion I think of its own in due course. Drew.
Yeah, and actually, I think this is a perfect note to close on, a comment from our viewer Sharon, who says to you, Simon, but I think to all of us, Simon, I believe that so many issues we are facing today are because we recognize how law is not always justice, how there is a division between one and the other. It feels like we are very close to something very profound, but this has been a tremendously stimulating, exciting conversation. I want to thank all of our guests for joining us for the Shakespeare Hour. And I also want to remind everyone about next week, where the Shakespeare Hour is thrilled to have a discussion about Shakespeare and film and welcome an amazing panel, including Dr. Peter Holland, Academy Award-winning Dame Helen Mirren, and the Tony Award-winning director, Julie Taymor. So tune in because you really don't want to miss this one next week. Thank you all and have a good night.
Thanks so much. Good night, everyone.